Hey guys, it's Dave Brown with ThrowFar GoFar. Hey, today we're going to talk about the path of travel for your feet and your hips related to the rotational style of discus, or this can also work actually for shot put. So this came up with a couple of my student athletes this week, and so here we're going to talk about it. One of the first things we do when we're lining up the modified South African or giving an approach is to get our foot placement right. And too often we'll see people line up directly down the throwing area aiming to 12 o'clock, and that really doesn't correlate or represent what's going to end up happening in a throw. So we want to make this as close to full spin or as close to what the technique's going to be later on down the road. So really we want to start at the back of the ring. If you can, start with 1 foot out. Sometimes you can't do that. You can start with 1 foot in. Especially if this is going to be the technique you use during a competition. But try and get that alignment heading in that backward 7 shape so that you're at an angle going from the back of the ring to roughly 11 o'clock. The dashed line on here gives you an idea of the direction. The other thing is on your feet. I don't like to start with these. You don't want to have these pointing to 12 o'clock when you start. We want to create getting used to how to rotate over that left out of the back. So we're going to keep these pointed to roughly a 3 o'clock direction, sometimes a little bit more. So those back 2 feet, which are now the lighter red ovals on there, again, we want to keep those facing 3 o'clock, sometimes 4, so that we can start an initial wind out of the back. When you do start your wind out of the back, and again, this is a drill, we really want to focus on how to stay over that left foot, how to drive, keep all your weight over that left knee. And then where we're trying to end up at the end of the throw, and we're going to talk more about positions here in a second, but where we're trying to end up is in a power position at the front of the ring to where you're almost in a heel-toe alignment again. Right foot's going to be near the center of the ring, maybe not quite the center, for some individuals, but you're definitely going to have that left in a position to where you can pivot over your toes and your hips can face the throwing area. So let's talk about the path of feet. So there's a couple lines on here. So starting with the back, what we're looking at here is generally the path of travel that your feet take. So here out of the back, we have your right foot. As soon as we take the rotation off of our left, our right foot is sprinting and driving us towards the middle of the ring. That left foot is going to sweep around our right and land at the front of the ring. There's a couple of key points here. One is when we first drive out of the back, we want to make sure we're driving linear and not immediately trying to just rotate and make this rotational. Otherwise, you'll see people tend to over-rotate or eat up only about half the ring. So let's use the ring. Try and keep a linear drive off that left foot, landing in the middle. We'll talk about landing pre-turn here in a minute. The second thing really is on your left foot, as you land with your right foot in the middle of the ring, and that left foot's getting ready to now sweep next to your right foot, let's keep those ankles close together. If you start sweeping that left foot to drive towards the front of the ring real wide, it puts you in an unstable position. It takes time. And as we start taking time or getting air gaps under our feet, we don't have any way to add power back into the ground or into the implement. So it just slows down the movement. So keep tight turns. It'll follow a similar path of travel as these red lines show. The only difference, I wrote it on here, is remember, this is a drill. So if you're trying to use the South African to help your full spin, remember out of the back, you're going to have a much different sweeping leg as you first come out of the back. So this is really to focus on how to land in the middle consistently, effectively, and set up that power position. Here what we're going to start looking at is what's happening with our hips as we start going through the turns. And this, to me, this is one of the most critical items that either can make or break your throws. We get a lot of throwers that can have great, fantastic upper body strength. They look very athletic, and yet they will fall out of positions because their hips aren't helping to support the throw. So what I've tried to illustrate here with the darker blue lines is an idea of how your hips are probably going to be aligned or should be aligned as we try and put these forces together in this throw. So out of the back, your hips are roughly facing 3 o'clock. There's no reason for your hips to go face 6 o'clock right behind you. When we come out of a full spin, it's not just immediately rotating. It's actually a series of getting around the left leg, getting the right leg out extended so that we can start sweeping it inward in. So it's easiest to start with, again, our feet facing that 3:30 position. hips facing 3 o'clock or slightly less, usually about 2:30, somewhere around there, kind of how I had it shown. And then what happens here is we're going to pivot over this left outer ball or outer toes of your left foot to pivot that knee around and get set up to drive across the ring. This is not a just immediately rotate and dump your right foot down as fast as you can. We want to make sure that we're actually rotating around that left leg, driving as if you're sprinting off that left leg so you can drive and fully extend it, and then pre-turn your hips in a very quick movement here, which is the numbers 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You can see where 1 through 5 is slight rotation, driving across the ring, and as we land that right foot towards center, or basically hover over center, our hips do a pretty interesting thing. Our hips don't move a whole lot across the ring. At this point, we're really getting our feet down. Our hips are basically, if you slow motioned it down in time, they're moving very slowly across. They're moving fast in a rotational direction, but they're not drifting across the ring. And this is going to be really important to make sure that when we land a power position, we're in a place where our hips are as close to over that right foot as they can, so that we can apply force from the center of the ring all the way up through that final drive. If we let our hips rotate or basically drift halfway through our stance, we just took our legs out of the equation, we get untorqued, and the throw kind of just falls apart. So start with the hips facing 3, pivot over the left, drive to 12 o'clock, and as that left leg is fully extended out of the back, the right can then sweep in. Make sure it's pre-turned. This is really, really, really important. I find that, especially with high school athletes, well, even for collegiate and other folks, we have a hard time, people have a hard time rotating more than about 90 degrees or 180 degrees, basically 90 degrees on their foot. So wherever your foot lands, you're only going to get about 90 degrees of rotation off of that to be able to rotate your hips to face the throwing area. So if you want to have your hips facing the throwing area at 12 o'clock, we need to have our right foot at basically 3 o'clock in this position. If it's pointed back at 6 o'clock, you're going to find your athlete will artificially extend their leg, and they will push off their leg, extend it, they won't be able to rotate it, and they'll be over their left leg through most of the throw. This is really evident when you start to video. Okay, at this point we're in the center of the ring, we've driven all the way to the center, we've started our rotation, our hips are now facing back towards 5 o'clock, so we're basically pointing with our left hand probably back to the 5 o'clock position. It almost looks like the starting position for a glide or a stand throw in the shot. It's basically resembling that with our hips. At this point, our hips do not travel very much. This is real important, and this is probably a fatal flaw we see in a lot of throwers, is they will drive to the center of the ring and immediately want to similarly come off of that right leg and move their hips all the way quickly to their left. We want to try and really make sure that we stay over that right leg, almost to allow our body to catch up. We want to be able to have driven over our right knee, start to rotate, and once we get that right knee in a position where our left leg touches down, then we're in a nice pre-stretch where we can be fully now in a pre-torque power position to be able to actually do something with the weight. So it's real important here, as as number 10 and 11 are showing on here. This is basically when your right leg is on the ground, your left leg still has not. It's in the air somewhere passing your right ankle right now. For the sequence of 12, 13, and 14, this is now 13 is the point where your left leg has now passed and reached and extended at the front of the trig. That opens up your hips to now face what appears to be a 1, 2 o'clock position. This puts you in a real strong, this is your power position stance. So now you're in a position where your hips are already starting to rotate. You've got some momentum behind them. You're still predominantly over that right leg. You can see that the line is not centered between the right and the left foot. It's still mainly over the right so that we can be under it, have that right knee under it, and keep rotating into the direction of the throw. At this point, the upper body is still facing over to the side or back towards about 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock. It is not unwinding itself. It will move partly in unison with the lower body, but right now the hips are ahead and trying to race ahead of that upper body. So the left leg, as we start getting into 14, starts to block a little bit, and we're getting set up. This is all about setting up this final effort so that everything so far has gotten us to center of the ring, getting the weight over the right, lots of momentum going. All our our weight is over that, 80%, 70% over that right leg, so we can start rotating that inward and be in a position to actually drive this. We'll talk about, arm length and what's happening with the upper body in another video. These last three sequences is what you're seeing on here is what's now happening with the right leg, as that left leg is now blocked up at the front of the trig. The right leg is now continuing to rotate inwards, so counterclockwise as it's extending violently into that final, snap finish for the upper body then to keep rotating around into the direction of the throw. What I wanted to illustrate on here, and what you see is the hips are not over, especially in the discus throw, they are not over the very front foot, your left foot. You're going to find that when you watch the path of travel on your hips, they travel a huge amount of distance in the first half as we're driving out of the back of the ring. Once we hit the center and we're landing the left, a lot of what's happening here is we're building up forces so that we can actually rotate, put all the force into the right leg, and be in a good position to help accelerate the upper body into that implement, into the throw. So you don't need the hips to travel horizontally a lot of distance through this 15, 16, 17 increment. What you need is to create a lot of torsional, a lot of rotational speed through this area. And at this point, your hips, left leg's blocking, your right leg's almost nearly fully extended, so you're getting just a final little snap as you keep rotating that right leg with your thrower. And at that point, that's the end point of your hips. There might be some follow through, whether they're getting a little bit over the left or getting some forward momentum from a weak block or falling something. There's lots of errors, but right now, I want to focus on where we want to try and get the hips aligned out of the middle just for repetitions on drill. So if your throwers can get through this mentality of keeping, let's go over it. We're keeping feet generally lined off to the right. We're keeping ankles close, keeping feet to the ground. We're trying to keep hips for the first half of the movement as we drive to the middle, keeping them nice and loose. They're driving across. They're not just thinking rotationally. Through the middle of the circle, we're thinking of how to then pre-turn the right foot. It'll pre-turn the hips. We get the hips lined up facing the back. We start to reach out, extend, land that left leg, and as we're landing that left leg and now basically creating even more torque in our right leg to set up how to really accelerate this, just as we're seeing on here with 15, 16, 17, then we're in a great position now to be as long as we can with that upper right arm. We've got some other things we could do with the upper left arm and the upper body, but again, we'll talk about that at another time. So that's the basics on paths of feet and the path of your hips through this part of the throw. I looked all over the place trying to find illustrations that talk about this, and it's funny, we always keep seeing the same picture that shows a reverse C or shows a guy coming out of the back, or always, I couldn't find anywhere that actually helps break down what's happening with the hips. And we do this with every new thrower we get, even the experienced ones. So trying to see if this visual will help some folks along. If it does, please let me know, and all the best. Hey, visit ThrowFarGoFar.com when you get a chance. Take care.